Welcome back to the Stone Zone here on the Roger Stone Show. So in breaking news, several tankers have been hit, evidently by landmines in the Black Sea and the Straits of Hormuz. So far, no reports of loss of life, but substantial damage. If we get more news on that, we will update you. Next, we're going to go to what we call our political roundtable. Joining me for this segment of the Stone Zone, right here on the Roger Stone Show, is Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Slingshot.news. Troy, welcome back into the Stone Zone.
Roger, as always, it's an honor to be with you.
So I don't know where to start. I must admit, even I am surprised. As you know, I unfortunately had a falling out with the investigative journalist Laura Loomer. We were for many years good friends. I did consider her like a daughter, and we fell out when she, for reasons I still don't quite understand, tried to smear and destroy Tulsi Gabbard, the woman who declassified as the director of national intelligence the documents that proved that the Russian collusion narrative was a seditious conspiracy and a hoax. Tulsi Gabbard, who proved that the impeachment over an alleged phone call that President Trump made to the Ukrainian President Zelensky was yet another contrived hoax. On her way out the door, Tulsi Gabbard proved that Dr. Anthony Fauci had lied repeatedly about the origins and development of the COVID-19 vaccination. So to me, Tulsi Gabbard is a hero. Tulsi Gabbard did great service for this administration before resigning to tend to a gravely ill husband, and she didn't deserve the kind of vicious personal attacks that Laura Loomer issued on her. And unfortunately, after a long friendship, we fell out about that. I think a lot of it had to do, of course, with the fact that I favored giving peace a chance. Don't accuse me of being soft on Islamic terrorism or radical jihad or radical Islam. I'm not. In fact, I applaud the recent remarks by Sid Rosenberg, who's absolutely right in his comments on Fox the other day. So, I know, having known Donald Trump since 1988, he has always been consistent since 1988 that the Iranian regime, the brutal Iranian regime, cannot have, must not have, will not have nuclear weapons. But in this case, Laura Loomer seems to have done a complete 180. I mean, she clearly recognizes that Zelensky is in league with neo-Nazis, clearly in league with the Azov battalion. She's been one of his harshest critics. Now suddenly she tells us, after an interview with Zelensky, that she's completely changed her views on this endless war, and she supports the Ukrainians, whose invasion by the Russians is caused by the ongoing efforts by the Biden administration, in violation of two different treaties that we signed, to push Ukraine into NATO. What do you think's going on here with Laura Loomer?
Well, Roger, this is a specific case, and we're talking about the specific nature of Ukraine's relationship with the United States and what Laura Loomer's interview or any kind of news relating to that interview how that may impact world events here going forward, Roger. And I still think when it comes to Ukraine, we don't have a full picture on their involvement on several issues. One issue I wanted to raise today was the issue of Ryan Ruth, who on September 15th, 2024, attempted to assassinate President Donald Trump at his West Palm Beach golf course, using a Soviet rifle, by the way. Ruth has ties to Ukraine in the boldest of ways, Roger. He actually traveled to Kiev in 2022 to protest the Russian offensive. He came within 400 yards of assassinating President Donald Trump at his West Palm Beach golf course, and he actively recruited veterans for the Ukraine war efforts in the United States. So he was reaching out to former military veterans, telling them they needed to go fight for Ukraine. He was actively involved in this. So this is a guy that nearly assassinated President Donald Trump. He's in prison for life plus, I believe, 86 months now because of that assassination attempt, and we still don't really know his exact involvement with Ukraine. This is just one example, Roger. You briefly mentioned the Ukrainian impeachment scandal. That was the first Trump impeachment. Now, I wanted to talk about that briefly as well, because doing some research into that and the call that surrounded that, Roger, after President Trump asked Zelensky to look into Hunter Biden's ties with Burisma and Joe Biden's threatening to fire prosecutors and withholding aid, Zelensky appointed a prosecutor called Ruslan Ryobo-Shapku to investigate Burisma's Hunter Biden deal. And despite direct evidence that Hunter had zero qualifications to serve on the board of that Ukrainian energy company, he had no relevant regional experience, no relevancy to the company other than the fact that his father was vice president at the time. And additionally here, Roger, there's video evidence of Joe Biden directly saying he threatened to withhold aid from Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor that was investigating the company paying his son $50,000 a month. So Zelensky appoints a prosecutor to look into this. They find nothing. It's basically just, here, President Trump, look, we investigated, but we didn't find anything. They leave that part out. And what happens in the aftermath of that call, Roger, that impeachment? Zelensky goes on to be one of Biden's greatest allies on the world stage and siphoned $110 billion, billions of dollars that Ukraine would not survive without. He siphons that from the U.S. taxpayers and goes on to campaign against President Donald Trump in 2024. So if you ask me, Roger, there's no way that anybody that could support President Donald Trump, that could claim to be one of his greatest supporters, could then turn around and say Zelensky is one of the best people, when Zelensky was intricately involved in the impeachment scandal. Not only that, but he's also campaigning against President Donald Trump in 2024. And there's even more angles to this to get in, Roger, but I want to get your reaction to this long storied history of Ukraine working against America, working against Americans, and specifically President Donald Trump.
And working with neo-Nazis. Laura Loomer confronted Ukrainian Nazis in Orlando. I was worried about her safety that day, as a matter of fact. But now this is a complete reversal. Reading from The Hill, far-right influencer Laura Loomer met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday after publicly reversing her long-held and outspoken opposition to backing Ukraine in its war with Russia, expressing support for the country in a visit to Kyiv. Now, just to be very clear, I am for Ukraine. I'm neither for Ukraine nor for Russia. I had members of my own family mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. So I'm not carrying any brief here for the Russians. I'd like to see an end to this war. But I do think that there's epic corruption in Ukraine. I have serious questions about whether the billions of dollars that we've spent on this war have been used in the war, whether they ended up in the pockets of politicians, either in Ukraine or in the United States. There are reports online that Laura Loomer was paid something like $1.3 million for this interview. I want to be very clear. I am not saying that. There are reports saying that. They're unconfirmed. We don't know if that's true, but they appear to be credible sources. It's hard for me to understand what else could get you to change your long-held position. This is one issue in which Laura Loomer and I were completely and totally aligned. We are now no longer aligned. I'm on neither side. I'm not for the Ukrainians, nor am I for the Russians. I'm for an end to the war. I'm for an end to the killing. This is a meat grinder, and it is being caused by the insistence of our NATO allies and the Biden administration attempting to push Ukraine into NATO in violation of the Budapest Memorandum, in violation of the Minsk Accords, in the violation of numerous agreements that we have made. Now, I have said in my criticism of Laura Loomer that I believe that there are instances where she's been paid. I have never said she's paid by Israel. I've never said she's paid by a foreign policy. I do think that this is checkbook journalism. I do think that you shouldn't call yourself an independent investigative journalist if your comments are being paid for by anyone. There are Foreign Agents Registration Acts. I have some clients for whom I have to file. I do not communicate on social media on their behalf. And if I did, I would be required to disclose that I have done so, but I have not done so. And I'm not going to play these receipt games with Laura Loomer, where she takes my advocacy for a pardon for someone, and then months later I advocate a change in the state law or the federal law under which they were charged, and call that lobbying because it's not, doesn't even fit in the same time sequence. So I do find this pretty shocking, and I just wonder what would cause Laura Loomer, who's quoted here as saying, I just had my first experience in a air raid in Ukraine. I feel like such an a-hole for minimizing the struggle of Ukrainians for the last 5 years. I often say I don't care. Looking back, that wasn't very nice of me to say. This is a complete reversal of her position. It's very hard to understand.
Well, and Roger, I want to throw in an angle here that I think people are missing out on, and it's important, that the number one trading partner that Ukraine has in this entire world is China. And they send about $8 billion worth of grain and raw earth materials to China on a yearly basis. So China has a vested interest in keeping Ukraine going. And if you look at the assets in the United States, we talked about Mitch McConnell last week, and we've talked about many others here on the show, those people always tend to support Ukraine. And when we look at Joe Biden and his policies toward China and the way that China was able to assert itself on the national stage when Biden was president and as this conflict escalated, I think we have to look at it and say, okay, what do we actually know about the pretext to this conflict, and what actually pushed these nations to this, like you said, a meat grinder where hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives, perhaps eventually even millions. It is terrible, Roger. And like you, I just want to see an end to this war. And I hate seeing on both sides, Zelensky being one of the main culprits, people stoking violence, getting more people killed. The killing has to stop.
Well, and they shouldn't try to tell us this is about democracy. Volodymyr Zelensky has closed down monasteries, has had priests and pastors beaten and tortured, has shut down churches, has harassed clerics, has postponed all elections, all Democratic elections, with a small d. So don't try to tell us it's about democracy. And for Loomer and Zelensky to talk about their interview being a defense of Christianity, as my friend Todd Wood over at CDM in the Skiff pointed out, that is based on the history. That is laughable, absolutely laughable. When we come back, I want to talk to you about one of the hottest congressional races in the country. These midterm elections are looking extraordinarily competitive. I'm a bit more optimistic than some. It is still early in politics. This election is not tomorrow. We're at the beginning of the summer. But very soon we will be locked into a situation. The election is looking very competitive. I want to focus on Florida's 7th District, Corey Mills, who still has an endorsement from the president, but seems to be facing more uphill problems with news this past week that he is the target of a federal investigation. I do want to note for the record that he denies that, and when you are the target of a federal investigation, federal investigators don't confirm it, but several credible news outlets have claimed that he is the target of federal investigations. We know for definite that he is investigations of an ethics investigation. My concern in the nutshell, if he is the Republican nominee in this leaning Republican district, I fear the district will be lost in a year in which Republicans cannot afford to lose any district. And we'll come back and talk about that on the other side. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to my friend Troy Smith, editor and publisher of Slingshot.news, and we'll be right back with more on the 2026 elections now that we have addressed the question of Laura Loomer's 180-degree about-face regarding the epically corrupt President Zelensky of Ukraine. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back for our final segment in the Stone Zone right here on the Roger Stone Show. We're listening to my good friend Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Slingshot.news. Before we leave, Laura Loomer, the investigative journalist, the allegedly independent investigative journalist, there were two things here I did like. She did bust Volodymyr Zelensky's chops for not wearing a suit when he goes to meet with Donald Trump. I agree with that. If he can wear a suit to the World Economic Forum meetings, he can wear a suit to the White House. It's a simple sign of respect. Then secondarily, and this is just kind of funny, she did have the audacity to ask him whether, based on the video that I think everyone around the world saw, he had snorted cocaine with the head of France, Macron. And of course, Zelensky said, absolutely not. In other words, don't believe what your eyes see, believe what I told you. Pretty funny.
Absolutely, Roger. And there were some good moments, and you have to, you have to give her credit there for asking some tough questions. But at the same time, when it's accompanied with just the overall, talk about Zelensky and how great Ukraine is, I think that has to be countered with the truth. And we were talking about it before the break, going into Corey Mills and this investigation. I think, when we talk about investigative reporting and work we've done here, Roger, on just Corey Mills and exposing the past ethics violations and things of that nature, the fact that a girlfriend was granted a restraining order against Corey Mills, and he lied to the president about that in order to receive his endorsement under false pretenses. When you examine all these things, Roger, that we've revealed here on the show, and the fact that an investigation has been launched, I think it's important to highlight that this is why the work is important, and this is why when work is influenced by monetary influences and people are coming in and paying you to say certain things, not that we're alleging anything of that nature, just that happens on a routine basis. That's why it's so important that this stuff comes from a legitimate place. And when we look at Corey Mills' race, I think you've highlighted this is an area where Republicans are going to struggle, because we have a Republican who has lied his way into this race and has repeatedly misrepresented himself. There's stories about him falsifying records for a Bronze Star. The man who supposedly gave it to him has no recollection of ever signing anything to award Corey Mills the Bronze Star. Roger, this is a race that I know you've been really watching closely, and that it seems like a self-inflicted wound that Corey Mills could fix by just simply being honest about his history here.
Yeah, look, I can understand why he might not want to resign. The Republicans need that vote. They need that seat in the House, but he could simply announce that he's not running for re-election. He would still be in office until next January. The Florida Republican primary is coming up August 18th. He's facing, as you point out, a myriad of issues. The three other military guys whose lives he claims that he saved have no recollection of that. There are serious questions about the financing of his first campaign. There are at least two women that he allegedly abused. One of them who did go get a warrant from a federal judge, a warrant or an order of protection, which, as you point out, he lied to President Trump. He circumvented the White House political operation. So those who blame the White House staff for this endorsement or the White House political operation don't know the history of it. And I think it's going to be a good year in Florida to be a Republican. I think Byron Donalds will be strong at the head of the ticket. I do think he's going to run away with the Republican primary for governor, despite a lot of online chatter. People have to wake up to the fact that X and the blogosphere, that's not the real world. The average Republican primary voter in the Sunshine State is 65 plus. They are not hanging on X every minute or Instagram or TikTok or Venmo or I would say any other of these internet sites to get their political news. They're getting their political news more likely from cable, from the mail, from the phone, and text messages, and that's what affects the real world. So I would keep a close eye on the 7th District race. There's no evidence that Corey Mills is going to drop, and I think that will make this seat, if he survives the primary, which is not at all definite,